And Kabbalah says that our whole purpose for being here in the physical, where we're in this realm of infinite diversity and the multitude, our purpose is to do this tikkun process, to this rectify, to repair, to heal the shattered vessels and regather the fragments back into a state of wholeness.
I believe we are at the tipping point toward a new earth. And there come times in history where different pioneers will come and bridge together two segments that we previously thought were separate and bring them together and find the unity in all of them. So right now we're talking about science and spirituality being on two ends of a spectrum. But our guest today, Dr. Theresa Bullard, has found a very unique way of bringing these two worlds together, linking things like science, consciousness, spirituality, and transformative technology to help us awaken to dormant capabilities within us. Dr. Theresa Bullard is a Ph.D. physicist, an international instructor for a modern mystery school, and host of Gaia's mystery teachings. It's fascinating because she's found this expert way of weaving together different concepts in very practical ways to help us understand things that we thought had no correlation and say, oh, wow, here are the patterns. Let's investigate this deeper. In this episode, we truly break paradigms because we're looking at this abyss that humanity's entering into, this unknown realm. And we're finding out so much about science, but we're also discovering and unleashing dormant aspects of ourselves through this awakening of consciousness, through this new curiosity in spirituality and metaphysics. Where does science come into all of this? And this is exactly what we're going to get into. We're going to be talking about the power of initiation in ancient lineages, the power of coherence in quantum physics, how to awaken dormant parts of our DNA, how to tap into the power of love. What is all this about dark matter and dark energy and how we only perceive 5% of reality? This is truly an episode that will blow your mind. And I invite you, if this episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and follow this podcast because we're going to have so many more pioneers in the new consciousness join us in this mission to help you find your truest potential and awaken whatever needs to be awakened for your gifts to arise and be showered to humanity. So without further ado, we present you the woman who is bringing together science and spirit in the most fascinating way, Dr. Theresa Bullard. Dr. Theresa Bullard, welcome to the podcast. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Oh gosh, I am excited about exploring more of Europe, and I've just recently started a whole new phase of life. I got married about a year ago, and moved country from the United States to UK and England, and life has just taken on some beautiful new directions, and so this is exciting me. And I'm about to launch a whole bunch of new initiatives, one of which is called the Quantum Minds TV, and writing a book and so forth. So there's a number of things I've got going on that are exciting.
Wow, a lot of expansion going on for you, Dr. Theresa. I'm so excited to have you here. Honestly, the intersection of where you're working at is, I think, a very sacred place in the world right now, which is science and spirit. Those two, the modern language of mysticism, science, and now bringing that with your perspective of the traditions and the alchemical traditions, Kabbalistic traditions, Hermetic, all of these different things and where they all meet is so fascinating. And I heard you say from a Kabbalistic perspective, humanity right now is standing at the edge of what we would call the abyss, what we would call, this transition and this ascension of what we're going through right now. And it's so beautiful to have voices like yours in the scene that can provide guidance for the next generations in a world where everything seems very separate, everything seems very rooted in an energy that is not in our wholeness, not in who we truly are. So I wanted to ask you, why now in this point of humanity? Why are we deciding to transition and make this next phase of our process to ascend? Why is all this going on right now?
It's a great question. I think that it's something that at some level, there's multiple answers to it. Number one, at one level, it's almost like there's something programmed within our blueprints as human, that we are meant to be making a leap towards a higher way of life on Earth. And some of us, really come in knowing or feeling, sensing, that the world should be a better place than it is. And then yet we experience the world around us and we feel like there's just something not right with this picture. And we want to see it shift. And so that's something that comes from deep within us. It's almost like a spiritual knowing that is woven into the fabric of the essence of who we are. And so at a spiritual level, it's part of our destiny, if we will, or our purpose to make a leap to a greater way of life. At a scientific level, there's technology is driving forward. It's an onward march. And we are at this precipice of needing to make a leap. Michio Kaku often writes about it in some of his books, and he's quoted other scientists who have talked about something they call the type 1 and type 2, type 3 societies, where it's based on how much energy do they use and harness, and what are the sources of those energy for their technological and societal usage, so to speak. And we are right at the precipice of making the leap to a type 1 society. We're not even a type 0, we're not even type 1. Type 1, type 2, type 3, they go to higher and higher levels. And we're at maybe a 0.7 type society at the moment, but within our generation, within less than 100 years, we are poised to make this leap technologically where, we're not so much relying on dead energy like fossil fuels. We're relying on the natural energy that comes to us from the sun, from the solar system, from all the natural elements that we can harness on the planet, but in a way that's really renewable, sustainable. Not to be political about it, but it's just a scientific concept. And then start venturing off planet and out into space, into our neighboring parts of the universe beyond us. So there is a technological drive for us to evolve, to make a leap. And yet, as a scientist, I really saw, knowledge and science and technology is really marching forward. And we have great power in our hands because of those technologies. But the question is, how are we using them? How are we applying them? And we're not always applying them towards the good of the whole. Or with the wisdom of the ancient sages who, left their wisdom for us to guide us at this time on the planet. We need the wisdom to come back in, to guide the science, to guide the application of the technology. And that's why I shifted, from just going straight down a PhD, or I got my PhD, but straight down a traditional physics route into, wait a second, these wisdom teachings really have something important to help us with and to steer the course in a good way. And then I think the third reason is that we, humanity, those, who are on the planet today, have called out, from our own soul. We are calling out for a better way of life, and we want to see that happen. Some people are taking that from a very political approach, other people, or the activist approach. Some people are taking it from the spiritual approach. Some people are taking it from the scientific. But we want to see, and we know that we can do better. And so there's a certain leaving an old paradigm behind and shifting into a new paradigm that's really happening right now.
I love that. And there is this sort of remembrance, I think, inside each of our DNAs to get to that next stage of development. And you mentioned technology, and really I agree with you in the sense that we can only take technology as far as our level of consciousness is at. So if we want to harness these new technologies, then our level of consciousness has to evolve in a way. And I know someone that you highly regard, Nikola Tesla, and he was, doing all kinds of crazy things with free energy. And what's fascinating to me that you mentioned in your series was that 95% of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. So you look at that, and we're only seeing the very small glimpse of what the universe is. What have you found outside of that 5% that scientists have been observing for many, many years, and they've been stuck in that 5%?
Yeah. So, when we look out at the universe, and this is the same as when we look out at just the world around us and we're perceiving things through our five senses, or even scientists perceiving things through their scientific detectors and apparatuses, all we are perceiving is the tip of the iceberg. Like all that we are aware of, the known universe is that 5%. It's the tip of the iceberg. And, if we're relying only on our five senses, we're probably only seeing, 1%, 0.1% is even smaller, right? So, but science has at least helped us to expand our awareness of the physical reality around us. And when it comes to this dark energy and dark matter that you've mentioned, the reason they call it dark, let me just define that for a moment, because some people misunderstand that term. It's dark because we don't directly see it. It doesn't emit its own light. We can't directly measure it. The only way we know it's there is because of its impact in other things, other ways that are measurable. So, for example, around a galaxy, we measure the gravitational force that keeps that galaxy together and spinning. And based on our measurements, and then you compare that to the mass that we can actually see in that galaxy and observe directly, it only amounts for about 5, or a small percentage of the galaxy itself. And yet the speed with which it's moving and staying together, it's like, well, there's like, a whole bunch that's missing. Where is it? So they know that there's matter there. They just don't know what it is. And so they call it dark because they don't know what it is. It's unknown to them. And the dark energy is like the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at an accelerated rate, which means things are pushing it to expand. Some force is coming in that is accelerating the rate of expansion of our universe. And it's like, well, where's that energy coming from? What is that force? We don't know. And so then they call it dark energy. And so there's some theories about, there's hypotheses and ideas about what these things are, but they don't really know. So scientists up to this day have spent hundreds of years, trying to identify particles. What is the basic building blocks of our physical universe? What is the universe made of? And originally they broke it down into there was the science, the physical aspects to things, the particles, the matter, the atoms, and then there was the mind and the spiritual or the metaphysical side of things. And for a while, science actually originally came from alchemy. And in alchemy, these two things were two sides of a coin, or two sort of parts that made up a whole. And there was mediators in between the two because they were at different vibrational ends of the spectrum. But at some point along the way, especially after Newtonian physics came, they divorced. The scientists tried to take science more towards like, let's just talk about the physical things that we can know, and let's leave the spiritual things to the mystics and the church and so forth. And in a way that was so that they had the freedom to research the science, and just say, well, hey, we're not saying anything about the authority of God or spirituality, or, that's the domain of the church. So it just gave them freedom. But I think down the line, it became its own scientific dogma that became more and more materialistically oriented. And they broke it down from, those basic building blocks all the way down to the atomic level and the subatomic level and the quarks. And, And yet the deeper they go in science, the more they realize it's not about the particles, it's about the fields of energy and the non-physical things, the almost metaphysical things that are really controlling everything.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and you were really fascinated to study, these origin stories. So either from quantum physics or from the scientific perspective to the ancient traditions, and the series you mentioned about the Big Bang and how that all came about. And then you also mentioned something that was very interesting in the Kabbalah that kind of reflected and mirrored the Big Bang theory. And essentially there's a prophecy or a potential for humanity, for us to rectify the shattered vessels that were left over after this explosion, this Big Bang. They call that the tikkun, right? In Kabbalah.
Yeah, the rectification and the healing process.
Yeah, let's dive deep into that, because I feel like that's a path that not only is it for the collective, but for individuals as well to rectify those shattered aspects of ourselves and our soul.
Yeah, well, that's a huge topic. So I guess the question is, how deep do you want to dive? I mean, we could
How
talk
deep does
about
the
it,
rabbit hole go?
right? We could talk about it from the Big Bang perspective, which is very cosmic, but we can also talk about it from the perspective of our own, the spiritual and metaphysical side of things, and soul and our own life experience. So, from whether you're talking it from metaphysics and Kabbalah, or you're talking about it from physics, the idea in essence was that there, at one point, everything was one, right? Science calls it the singularity. It was all one point, and infinitely dense point of possibility and potentiality and light that came out of the quantum field, the quantum vacuum. From the metaphysical or spiritual perspective, they talk about it as the oneness of the spirit, or some say the monad, but there was this oneness. And we, at some point, in order for something more to come than just that pure potentiality or that pure state of beingness, right? It was potential, but it wasn't actual. It had lots of possibilities, but none of it was manifested. And so in order for something to emerge and for maybe that one thing to reflect upon its own existence, to know itself, it reached out, it emanated out. And it, in Kabbalah, they say at first it emanated out in 10 sort of waves of energy, 10 dimensions or 10 fields, 10 rays, they kind of talk about it in different ways. And each one of those kind of created a different density level.
Yeah.
And in physics today, they even talk about multiple dimensions as 10, 11, 12 dimensions. And there's this hyperspace, and the further higher you go in the dimensions, the more complex things become. And yet at the same time, the more integrated things become. And so from that singularity came multiple, let's say 10, right? If we want to go with the Kabbalistic system, but then it continued to divide and divide and divide, and it became, the multitude. And some say, the initial creation was too perfect in Kabbalah. They say it was too perfect, and it couldn't contain that container that was originally created. Those 10 emanations were like vessels or containers, and they couldn't hold the totality of the oneness. And in that process, that expansion out, we could even compare that to like the inflation of space and time, the creation of the container of the universe itself. It's like it couldn't hold the infinite allness that was flowing out from that oneness and that source. And so because of that, the container became full and over full, and it shattered. There was an explosion, and some kind of imperfections started to come in because of that. And even our own souls and our own, individuality, like we are each a fragment of that original oneness. And so the search, and then, the further down through the densities we fell, so to speak, all those fragments are falling down through those densities. The farther we fall, the more distant we are from that
Separate.
original oneness.
Yes.
Yeah. The more we feel separation. And Kabbalah says that our whole purpose for being here in the physical, where we're in this realm of infinite diversity and the multitude, our purpose is to do this tikkun process, to this rectify, to repair, to heal the shattered vessels and regather the fragments back into a state of wholeness. So how do you go from this, this infinite diversity of all these ingredients and all these, individual aspects that have become polluted and corrupted through their separation and fall into different densities? How do you take them from that state, and bring it to a state of wholeness and integration, so that it can then hopefully come to a place where it's not only whole and one vessel again, but it's more incorruptible, like it's more integral. And that is what I would say the essence of alchemy is all about, is how do we take something from a raw state to a more perfected state where it can't be as corrupted or shattered, and then it can hold more of the fullness of that potential. So this is how they integrate. And so we're all a part of that, and Kabbalah says that the most important thing that we could be doing in our life is to search, to be on that healing journey, and healing starting with oneself, right? Think about the places where you have had shattering moments in your life, and fragments of, that innocence have been lost, and even parts of your own psyche and soul have kind of gotten stuck in the past from those moments of shattering or a disappointment or trauma, or realizing the world isn't as beautiful as we thought it was as children, or whatever that point is. We all get kind of stuck in these different places in our past, within our own mind and belief systems, and we need to heal those so that we can come into the now again and be in that state of wholeness.
And you talk a lot about the power of the will. And I think when we have that will of heading down this path and initiating ourselves into this healing process and healing thyself, I think a lot of things start moving in our life. And, we might get a glimpse of that oneness or wholeness, and feel even less separate from the divine, from that source that we came from. And there's this concept in Kabbalah, which is I think you pronounce it Shambhala. Is that correct?
Shambhala.
Shambhala.
Yeah, it's actually more of a Tibetan concept, but Kabbalah would have a similar concept, which is the new heaven on earth type of concept. Yeah.
Like that world peace and harmony that we're creating. But I think a lot of us are doubtful, because we'd be like, all right, we need 8 billion people to reach that state of oneness in order for the world to change. But you mentioned, and a lot of people have said this in the past, and spiritual masters have said that you really only need, I think it's like less than 3% of the world population, or square root of 1 or something like that. What does that mean, that you only need a small percentage of people to go on this path of initiation and transformation for the collective to change?
Yeah, so it's about a tipping point, and it's also about how we all share a connection into what we can call the collective unconscious, or some people would call it the collective consciousness of humanity. And so let's talk about tipping points first of all, and then we can talk about how we all make an impact into the collective consciousness. So and tipping points are interesting because we're all experiencing so many tipping points on our planet at one time right now. There's environmental tipping points, there's global population tipping points, economic tipping points, meaning at a tipping point, it's a point of instability. And you could go a little bit this way or a little bit that way, and it's going to completely change the ultimate course that things would progress towards. And so just the littlest shifts can make a huge difference down the line when it comes to a tipping point. And that means that just a small percentage of change can make a huge difference in the final outcome. And which then gives us both a responsibility and an opportunity. There's the responsibility to really clean up our act and be careful about which way we're steering those tipping points. Because if we don't take responsibility and we just keep going the way we're going, we're going to keep creating more of the same, and we will destabilize the situation even further, which is what a lot of scientists are talking about with like global temperatures rising. Like if the global sort of climate change stuff keeps happening and the temperatures rise just a few more degree, like another degree, ice caps melt, that then, creates a ricocheting effect of water, and, the life, the cycle, all of it, starts to shift because of that 1 degree, right, of change in global temperature. If we talk about it, on the other hand, if we shift it towards the positive direction just a little bit, we just take it down a notch, for example, or we change our ways so that we don't keep exacerbating the issue. Not that we're necessarily causing the issue, but we're exacerbating it. Then, we can really also steer things in a direction that helps us restabilize. And so within the mindset, right, let's come and talk again about the consciousness piece. Within the mindset of people, there's a certain collective narrative that we get into, and where people are focusing their energy and their attention. The masses generally are focusing on who can I blame, right? And there's anger, there's victimhood, there's anger there, and this is a very popular narrative, especially right now, probably, more than we've seen in a long time, this narrative of victimhood. And we're at a much larger population on the planet than we used to be. And so this outpouring of anger and victimhood is really driving us into a certain flow collectively within our collective consciousness. But then there's the people who are saying, okay, no, like Gandhi said, I have to be the change, right? How can I create a better, way of life for myself? How can I create more joy? How can I heal? How can I take personal responsibility? How can I be more in charge of what I create in my life, and create a better way, right? And create a more peaceful way. How can I, if I want to create peace in the world, how can I have peace in my own life? And so as we as individuals start really looking at that, and it does take will, because the current of humanity is driving along, in a particular direction that the masses are going. And to go against that current, it takes a lot of strength and personal willpower. And, it's like trying to walk up a mountain, but you're walking in the stream, and the stream's going down the mountain, and you're trying to go up the mountain. And so you have to really become very strong to keep connected to your own personal responsibility, and that takes will, and it's something that we strengthen over time. But when we can reach a critical mass of people, which is where we hit that tipping point, that is when we can almost have a spontaneous up-leveling or opening up of opportunity for more of the masses to wake up to more of that personal responsibility, for example. So it doesn't take 8 billion people to make this shift. It only takes a critical mass, that percentage, that few percent that is needed to tip the scale towards, the positive. And then a momentum starts to build, like a little bit of a snowball that becomes the avalanche, right? It starts to build and build and build. It gains its momentum, and then more and more people, spontaneously start to awaken to this. Bruce Lipton and Steve Bierman wrote a fantastic book called Spontaneous Evolution that I thought was really good at describing this, both from a like a science perspective, as well as from a socioeconomic perspective or socio-political perspective. And this is something that I talk about in a different way in my book on the Game Changers, in terms of being social alchemists. How can we alchemically participate in our own evolution? So some people say it's 10%, some people say it's 3%, some people say it's 1, and there are some out there who have somehow calculated square root of 1% of the population, meaning the numbers are attainable.
Yes, 100%.
And it gives hope, right?
Especially when we gather in tribes, and it's the importance of finding the others and really going out there in our own authentic truth and attracting the people that are in that coherent and similar level, so we can collectively start tipping that balance. You even mentioned the importance of our aura, this electromagnetic field that can extend as wide as, I think it was 50 feet beyond us, and our hearts, most powerful electromagnetic frequency when we're connected with our hearts, and not so much in our mind all the time or in other energy centers that are holding us maybe more rooted and stuck, or creating energy leakages in our system. When we connect with our heart, I love that concept of that small potential of coherent groups being able to affect reality. As Dr. Joe Dispenza would say, the collective network of observers, because in quantum physics, the observer, the consciousness, has such a great influence, and you've talked so much about that. I wanted to ask you, not to overcomplicate things, but I wanted to ask you about the multiverse.
Before we go on to a topic like that, can we go back to this concept of coherence for a moment?
Yes.
I think that, when it comes to groups, and you have sort of a personal resonance with that group, and, we say, okay, well, we're in our authentic truth and we're forming as a group. Coherence is really key for the power of the group to amplify. So first of all, and this applies even at the micro level within us, like for us to really make a shift, we have to have coherence within ourselves, within our thoughts, within our heart, like we're really feeling it, within our subconscious. So we can come, the mind, the heart, and the gut all need to be in alignment. And then that alignment needs to be in alignment with our purpose, our spiritual purpose. And so when we can bring all of these things into alignment with each other, into coherence and resonance with each other, now everything is going to push in the same direction. It's going to move forward. Whereas if, let's say, I have a belief system that feels good to me, and yet subconsciously I don't fully buy it. I doubt, right? I have doubts, or I have my own insecurity that get in the way of me really living that belief system, or, living my authentic self, because my subconscious wounding is getting in the way. Then there's a cognitive dissonance within us. And, it's like we'll be in a conflict, an internal struggle inside of ourselves. And then that creates stress, it creates angst, it creates shame. There's all kinds of negative things that come. So we have to get multiple levels of ourselves in coherence. And then when we come together as a group, we have to get multiple people who are in coherence within themselves also to be in coherence with each other. And that's where you can have like intention experiments, group meditations, group chanting, things like that, where we create an amplified resonant field with each other. But then we need to send that out. It's not just for our own experiences, for something that really brings benefit to the whole. But then, there's, okay, how can we make those separate groups that are all coming together also unite? Yes. And not be separate, because some people's authentic truth is different from other people's authentic truth. Yes. And so we have to still keep that open mind that, we're ultimately one humanity, and it's not about our ideology or even our belief system. It's about our common unity as humans who have a higher destiny. There's just something there that we need to move beyond individual values and more into universal principles, from beyond the personal into universal. And that, when we can come into those universal principles, that helps us to unite. And that's where I have personally found things like alchemy and hermetics, they're not so much it's not about how we feel about it. It is what it is, just like physics. It is what it is. It doesn't
They're
matter.
laws, yeah.
They're
Universal
laws. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you like gravity or don't like gravity. It just functions, right? It does what it does. And we have to, rather than, try and fight against it, we just have to learn to harness it. And then we can redirect it. So I find that some of these universal wisdom teachings give us clarity on those principles that transcend culture, race, personality kind of stuff, individuality. It transcends these things so that it can give us a common platform to unite when people are really ready to explore into those things, which is what we do in the mystery school lineage. And then the other final thing I would say about creating an impact on the collective consciousness is, what I have found personally is that when we can bring in the power of initiation in a lineage, in an authentic lineage that's intact and that really holds that power within the light, it amplifies, so the power of one individual expands by 10 to 100 to 1,000, depending on how many steps of that deeper path of initiation they go through. So it's almost like there's a spiritual technology for accelerating and amplifying our energy and accelerating our evolution that happens through the power of initiation. So now if you bring individual coherent people together in a group with the power of initiation, you've just amplified it another, factors of 10. And then we can really start having impact on the whole, on the collective.
Spiritual technology. Wow. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask you, to piggyback off that, if you were to take some main alchemical hermetic principles or laws to explain how humanity and individual people can transcend this tribal consciousness that we've been rooted in our limbic brains for evolution, for millions of years, how can we take those principles and apply it directly to transcending this tribal separate way of seeing the world?
Well, I think that first is to recognize that the world of the senses is a world of illusion in many ways. And so the senses are what cause us to perceive separation. And it's not that the physical world is an illusion. That's not what I'm saying. I'm a scientist. There is a physical reality that we're addressing here. But where the illusion comes in is within our own interpretation of what we think is true. What we, if we base our truth off of either what we perceive with our five senses or especially when people start basing their truth off of what they feel at a subjective level, now we start to get into a world of illusion because it's more, based on interpretation, very limited perception, faulty perception. It's polluted by their own issues, to the degree that they haven't healed themselves. There's a lot of misinterpretation that comes in. There's filters. And so first we need to recognize that this outer, what we think is the truth of the reality is an illusion. That's the matrix, right? The matrix is also the system.
Take the red pill.
Of the world, yeah. But what does that mean? I mean, the system of the world, the media, the politics, the financial industry, the educational, all of these different things, these are systems that have rooted us into a particular way. Cultural programming, religious programming, familial programming, and you mentioned the tribal stuff, like tribal separations.
Yeah. Us versus them.
Exactly. And it's based on that programming from one generation to another that passes on a particular identity and then as we attach to that identity, now the ego really steps in and says, this is me, and anything that's different from me is a potential threat. And that creates more separation and struggle. Whereas if we identify this, who am I? And this is really the core of a lot of mystery teachings is redefining who we think we are. Instead of defining who we are based on our physical life experience and our family and our religion and our politics and our educational level, our financial level, all of these outer world things, we have to base who we are on our eternal spirit. And I am an eternal being. Even we could even say that eternal being is of a divine essence, and every single person has that divine essence within them. You can call it God, you can call it source, whatever you want to call it. It's inside of everybody. And this is where mystical teachings very much differ from religious teachings, because mystical teachings say that divine essence is within all things, and therefore we want to honor all things as an expression of the divine, even if it's masked by, personality and ego stuff. Inside, it's a fundamental shift from people are, like religious programming says, people are born into sin or are, faulty and evil in their nature and so forth, and therefore they're bad, they're the enemy. And no, people are, divine in their essence. They're good, in their essence. They may be just misguided, or maybe just a bit ignorant, or, so there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen there in the way we look at other people, at ourselves, and at the world. And it comes down to this question, who am I? And can you define who you are and make that definition have absolutely nothing to do with this world?
Yes. And I think in order to be able to see the world, Paul Selig, he calls that moving up into the kingdom, the upper room, the guides channel. And they talk about going into the upper room where you see everything around you as divine, inherently divine in form. And in the tree of life, you mentioned in the top, it's the representative of the spirit, and the bottom is the form or the human nature. In between all that is the soul's journey. If you want to kind of break down that process of what that looks like with the tree of life.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if we could show the tree of life, but
we'll put a picture. Yes.
Okay, great. So at the very top of the tree of life is that original oneness, right? That divine spark. We could call it, back to the singularity or the monad, or that original where everything is one. And from that, at the very top, emanates out all of, these different expressions of that oneness into 10 other spheres. And, so it emanates out. And as, those 10 other spheres, they form a couple different functions. On one hand, they reflect the light from the oneness and they reflect it down, kind of like if a scientist was setting up a laser and towards a target. If the laser went directly to the target, it might burn it up. It might be overpowering. So what the scientists will do, or the engineer, is they'll take the laser, they'll bounce it off of mirrors, they'll take it through some lenses, they'll kind of focus it, but also diminish the light a bit, so that by the time it reaches its target, it is hopefully the right amount. And these lenses are within the tree of life as well. They take that high power energy from the source, and then they focus it, they reflect it, they might diminish it a bit
because the source energy is way too strong.
Too strong. Yeah. And they call it in Kabbalah, they call it concealment, that the source energy gets concealed as it goes further and further down the tree. And they talk about it, on one hand, going down the path of the flaming sword, where it zigzags back and forth between each of them. And by the time it comes to the bottom of the tree, it has become far more concealed, and yet at a level that can be held and contained or embodied within the physical. And so that's saying that our physical experience here can only really contain a fraction of the light that comes from the source. And so this tree of life was one of the sort of, as the shattering happened in that original shattering, and then like the parts got regathered, and it went through a couple of these processes, and the tree that we are familiar with today, there's a couple versions of it, but that tree is sort of the regathering into a system or a structure that allows for that diminishment of the light as it comes down to be contained. And so this tree also relates to us at a very individual level. At the top of it is our true divine self that is infinite and eternal and so forth. At the bottom is our physical body, and everything in between. You could see it a couple different ways, but they talk about levels of the soul. And, so there's the spirit at the very top. So we could say like the top triad, there's the oneness, but then there's these two other energies. One is expansion, which they might, say is like a masculine, and the other is contraction, which they might say is a feminine force. So these two archetypal forces of creation, expansion, contraction, or masculine, feminine, they call them wisdom and understanding. These are also part of our spirit, spiritual level, or eternal self. It's like the three in the one. But then you come below, and there's these 7 spheres below, or in the middle, and they form different aspects of the soul. And so they talk about the 7 dimensions of the soul, and there's different veils between the different levels as well, that as we get to know ourselves more deeply, we pass through those veils, and ultimately it's a journey. That tikkun is a journey of going from all I am is the physical and defining ourselves based on the physical, to realizing, on this journey of knowing ourselves, coming into connection with our soul and the deeper workings of our subconscious and our rational mind and our emotional side, and then into our heart center, and then into our relationship with power and personal empowerment and responsibility, and then into our relationship with love and our personal flowing and altruism and service, and then bridging across into hidden knowledge, and then finally re-embracing the spirit, the eternal self. So it's a journey that we do in the Modern Mystery School called Ascending the Tree of Life, which is we do it more in a universal kind of hermetic approach to the Kabbalistic system versus a religious or dogmatic approach to it. It's very much drawing from ancient wisdom teachings that are very universal, and not tied to any particular or just one religion. But that journey of discovery and the tikkun, the healing, the rectification of the self happens through it. And the more that people do that, the more collectively we are starting to heal as well.
Yeah. And with the principle of as within, so without, as above, so below, when you look at, our deepest nature, you look at our DNA. And, we've been told that our DNA, 95% of it is junk. We don't need it. And in your teachings, you've explained like the unraveling of the process using the tree of life to help people activate certain parts of their DNA where they're able to receive keys to start unlocking certain things within us that are dormant. First, why do you think that there are parts of our DNA that have not been tapped into yet?
Well, yeah. So science says, that the genome, for example, the genes that they say build up all the amino acids that build the proteins that form the body and everything about us, that genome is only 3 to 5% of the totality of the DNA within humans. And now, we're progressing, right? So after the Human Genome Project, they thought, we're going to discover all the secrets to health and longevity and being able to design, and all these new drugs that can come out as a result of knowing the genes. But then they realized, no, this is not actually going to give us as much as we thought it was. And then they had to start looking beyond just the genes. And so then then there was the epigenetic revolution, where there's a layer above the genes, and they're like on and off switches to each gene. And we have the ability to, through our mind, through our attitudes, through our beliefs, through our lifestyle choices, through our environmental exposures, like these are the things that can control the epigenetic layers. And we can either turn those switches on or off to our genetic potential, So not every person is utilizing all of their genetic potential. Now, some of it we don't want to utilize. Like there might be genetic predispositions in there that are not good. And so we want those ones to be off. But then there's other genetic potentials that are there that would be good, and we want them on. And that a lot of it is responding to environmental cues, but some of that environment is also based on your attitudes, how much your stress levels are, like these types of things. And so practices like meditation, healing, like all of these will help to enhance the DNA's ability to access more of its genetic potential. But now scientists are also realizing there's another layer even above that. Yeah. And that other layer that's actually responsible for controlling, almost like the software programming, the operating system that tells that application of that switch to turn on or off.
The Mac iOS.
Yeah, exactly. So that operating system actually resides within the 97% of DNA that they don't understand still. Yeah. They call it the introns, meaning the non-coding sections. But now they're starting to realize actually there's a lot going on in there. It's not about the genes, it's about the instructions that control the genes. And the instructions that control the epigenetics sometimes. And so it's in the introns. And, I've been saying for a long time, evolution, if the 97% were junk, evolution would have gotten rid of it a long time ago. Completely inefficient to unwind and transcribe and rewind and, wrap the DNA up around all these histones and so forth, if 97% of that is junk. And so it's there for a reason. We just need to understand it. And some of it is just potential that we have yet to realize and awaken, activate. So that's the scientific side of it. Then we come to the metaphysical side of it. And through my studies in the Modern Mystery School, I was exposed through Kabbalah in particular to teachings I had never heard anyone talking about before, but it made so much sense because
you went deep down the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah. But it just, the more I studied Kabbalah, the more I realized like, wow, these guys are talking about concepts that modern scientists are just starting to talk about. Yeah. And yet these guys, they have a different language and a more metaphorical way of talking about it, but the concepts in their essence are the same, and they've had it for thousands of years. So what else have they known for thousands of years?
You said that 3,000 years ago, all these top spiritual masters, shamans, they got together in the temple of King Solomon to find those keys that you're talking about, to awaken the divine potentials within us.
Mm. Yeah, and that in and of itself was a pretty miraculous feat, to gather all these, sages and medicine men and women and shamans and so forth from all over the world to come together in one place and have an open exchange of their teachings, their ideas, their methods, their modalities with each other. And what King Solomon wanted to do was test them out to find the ones that worked universally again, not the ones that were just, they work for your culture or your tribal, ancestral line, or they work in that area of the planet, but maybe they don't work universally. He wanted the ones that worked universally. So it became like this big melting pot, almost like a Renaissance or a time of, the libraries of Alexandria, where there was just like all the learned people, came together, and there was a much more open exchange rather than all of the tribal warfare of, we have to guard our secrets.
Yeah, but we've never heard of that in the history books. It never told us that the King Solomon even was like a master initiate or alchemist in that sense.
Well, yeah. So history is written by who?
Yeah.
And there are hints at it in the Bible, for example, but there are other sources of history that do talk about, for example, you can read Sufi poetry by Rumi, and he's referring to King Solomon. You can read in some of the Arabic, ancient Arabic alchemists, and they're talking about King Solomon. So you can. I've even heard of shamans in the Amazon jungle in Brazil claiming lineage and teachings from King Solomon. So, there's history is a particular narrative, and it maybe is one side of the story, but it's not the totality. And back then, nothing was written down, or very little was written down. Maybe the bloodlines were written down, who beget who beget who beget who, for example. But much of the tradition was oral teachings, oral storytelling. Some of it came in songs, some of it came in, the mythologies, the things that we would remember. Because they inspired, some emotional investment into the drama of, or the remembering of the song. But there was also this, in the mystery school traditions, there was the process of orally handing down from the teacher to the student, and then, training those students, and the students who really went through to the higher and higher levels or deeper levels of training that were ready to really step into higher levels of responsibility, they got taught the next level because they earned that, readiness to receive that next level to be revealed. And there was also a process of needing to make sure that individual egos don't come in and pollute, or individual memories don't distort. So clean, having a clean, as best as they could, a clean oral tradition to pass down the knowledge. Yeah. So there's this process of needing to realize that history, wasn't always written down, and that the oral traditions are often very much an essential part of the history. And just because we can't today go, well, how do I know that's true? Tell me what book I can read it in, or where can I find it on the internet? It's like, well, but it's part of the oral tradition, and some things still are part of the oral tradition.
Wow. Yeah. And King Solomon, so who really was he, and how can we continue his pursuits in this modern age?
Well, he was the son of King David. But unlike King David was like a warrior king who, brought the land together, people together in a land or a kingdom by war. It was a warfare that basically allowed him to gather or acquire that land. But King Solomon was a son who didn't have to do the war to get, he already inherited, but he came forward, and he had been trained from a very young age by some of the greatest sages in the land of King David. And they trained him with mystical awarenesses, with Kabbalistic teachings, Hermetic teachings, and so forth. And he was taught through these ancient traditions, wisdom traditions, and he was initiated. And he, believed in some of the prophecies. The early teachings show, or said, their sort of creation stories would say that we started in a divine state. And then we kind of came out, or fell out of that divine state for one reason or another. But there was always this prediction or prophecy that at one point we will regain our perfection, or we will reclaim our divinity. And in the Kabbalistic system, for example, they call it the Adam Kadmon, the perfected human, or the divine human. And there was this, like, he made it his personal mission to, how can we find the keys to reawakening the potential of the Adam Kadmon, and how can we then create a society and a way of life within this kingdom that really helps to create a model for what that heaven on earth might look like, or what that new kingdom of earth might look like, where we're all one people versus the tribal warfare. So this was his personal mission, and everything that he did was towards that. And all this gathering of these sages and medicine people, and this open exchange from all over, he was not allowing himself to be bound to the tradition and the religion. At the time, he was exploring that there's value in every tradition, there's wisdom in every tradition, there's truth in every tradition, and there are distortions in every tradition. So, he wanted to find where there was agreement between different teachings and different traditions. And where there was agreement, he said, okay, there's a universal kind of principle, there's a similarity, commonality happening here, that can unite us. But everywhere where there were differences, okay, well, somewhere there's some different interpretations, or some distortion that's come in here, and let's kind of put that to the side for the time being. And he took all of this and he brought it together in alignment with the tree of life as a way to organize the information, to kind of structure and to see how it all works together. And then, not only was it the teachings, but also the methods. And these methods he felt were somehow awakening some key or another within that potential of humanity to become the Adam Kedmon, or that perfected human. Of course, they didn't call it the DNA at the time. They saw that the blueprint of this perfected human was the tree of life. And so he aligned the tree of life as the original blueprint. But from a sacred geometric perspective, you can look at the tree of life and you can see that it's almost like the scaffolding upon which the DNA is organized around. That tree of life goes inside the DNA.
What would you say is the latest divine potential that you've unlocked in your life and in your DNA?
That's an interesting question. I mean, for me, it's been a journey, right? It's always a journey. But it did start with receiving actually a life activation, which is a modality that goes back to that time of King Solomon and has been passed down through the mystery school tradition. And that really turned like a switch on. What I find is that as we awaken more, some people might call it ascension, the more we ascend, it's actually what it's like is it's expanding our consciousness more, especially our self-awareness.
Yeah.
And so awakening intuition, awakening a greater understanding of ourselves and our past and how that comes to inform our ability to fulfill our purpose and so forth, and coming into clarity. So it was very distinct in the early days of my journey, where after about 4 months after I had that life activation, for example, I had all these, just immediately started having all these little personal insights of habits I had, what was serving my higher potential, what wasn't serving my higher potential, and the things that weren't serving, I disposed of and changed. And I made all these little incremental changes in my daily life. And no one of them would have been a big deal, but adding them all up, it created, a big shift. And then about 4 months down the line, it was also the awareness of, okay, I have this passion over here for science, and I have this passion over here for metaphysics and spirituality and consciousness. And then I have this gift of kind of being able to connect the dots.
Yeah, pattern recognition.
And then seeing how can I bring them together? Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. This realization of a purpose to bridge science and spirituality. And so then it set me on a journey of, okay, well, now how do I do that? And that's a process that's still unfolding. It's a discovery process along the way. I would say my most recent awakening is just really in the power of love itself. That as we really come into that coherent, total being coherent vibration of love, that it is an unstoppable force. You're not going to let anything get in your way when something stands between you and something you truly, deeply love and care about. If you have a strong enough will and this is aligned, I'm going to push through whatever that obstacle is.
And the momentum that you also talked about.
Momentum. To kind of figure out how to build that momentum and then keep that momentum going. And just at a very personal level, I mean, my now husband and I, we met just a little bit before the shutdown of the pandemic, so just towards the later part of 2019. And it was just exchange, kind of remote. I mean, I lived in the US and he lived in the UK. And so it was a long distance thing, but just, it wasn't really necessarily a relationship at first, but there was a conversation that was happening. We had met in person, but then there was a conversation that followed after that and getting to know each other. And then we started to see each other more when we could, through travel and so forth. And then we were planning, okay, now we're going to start seeing each other as we got into 2020. We're going to start seeing each other more. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And it was like the world shut down and travel stopped and so forth. But we were so determined that this is right. And there's so much love driving as a force, not an emotion, not a romantic notion, but as a force moving and propelling me to find a way through the obstacles. And we did. We found ways. And what I realized is that this world really is a matrix, and you just have to know how to find that open door to walk through within the rules of the structure. But you got to dig, and there was the will driven by that force of love to really dig and create the reality. And we managed to have. For me personally, it was 2 years of really being in that resonance of love, and love being a force that conquers anything else.
And it's that same energy that allows you to become more of a magnet to attract what it is that you are intending and willing to create in your life, seeing beyond the hologram, as you called it. Theresa, I could talk to you for hours. I know we've been here for a while. We wrap up every podcast with a rapid fire 3 questions called the final trio that you can answer in any way you want. Before that, I would love to let people know where they can find you, all your upcoming projects that are happening right now, and where would you send people for that?
Okay. So the best place to find out more about me is at my website, theresabullard.com. So TheresaBullard.com. And that's going to have, there's a lot that's there on that website. It's got everything about my mystery teaching series on Gaia, everything, some of my stuff about the Modern Mystery School. Now, the Modern Mystery School is not my mystery school. This is something people often mistake. Mystery School is an ancient lineage that I'm a senior international teacher for the mystery school, but they can also find out more about that at modernmysteryschool.com. And some of my newest things, well, of course, you can also follow me on social media or on Facebook, Instagram. It's always Dr. Bullard. Making sure you spell it right. There are impersonators out there. We've had some.
There's a lot. I'm like, bro. Theresa followed me. Nah.
Yeah. You got to be careful about those impersonators, especially on Instagram for whatever reason. I'm on YouTube. You can find my channel on YouTube. There's a lot of free content, a lot of free videos. And one of the things that we're about to launch actually today is Quantum Minds TV. So it is deep conversations with some pretty brilliant minds around, what it's going to take to create a shift in human consciousness. So it's me and other distinguished guests. So we're just launching that. It'll come out about once a week. Mystery Teachings, they can find out more about that at mysteryteachings.com as well.
Awesome.
And then we've got Quantum Learning Academy, which is something that is launching now. We have a center here in Yorkshire, in West Yorkshire, and but we'll be coming out with more and more available online as well into next year.
Amazing. I'm so excited for all those projects and the conversations. When I saw that coming out, I think the first one's going to be with Billy Carlson. So yeah, I'm excited about that. So for the rapid fire final trio, the first one I wanted to ask you is, what is the secret formula to developing a quantum mind?
So a quantum mind is ultimately one that has replaced or done away with the old paradigm that's built on Newtonian concepts. Those Newtonian concepts are materialism, determinism, realism, and separation. And we've replaced that with quantum concepts. And those quantum concepts are around connection, complementarity. It's really, you can break it all down to complementarity and consciousness. There's 2, but within complementarity is a whole bunch of, like connection and uncertainty and so forth, and how to thrive within that quantum mindset. And to get into actually accessing the quantum coherent state, quantum field, and that ability to perceive from that place is to connect to the gap, connect to the space between things. Rather than focusing on the things, focus on the space between, and really come to that place of stillness, right? Stillness and silence. I'm trying to keep it rapid.
In that, yeah, and in that space, because in the stillness, I think we kind of let go of this dualistic perception of the world, and we can tune into that unity consciousness more rapidly, more easily.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's definitely, wow, quantum for sure. The second one is, if you were to give humanity a key, hand them a key to activate their non-coding sections of their DNA, their quantum potentials to become this true self, what would that key be?
Well, the main key is to know thyself as a divine being. That would be the core essence of it. And if you want actual practical ways to do that, then I would highly encourage people to watch one of my mystery teachings episodes. It's episode 2 of season 2 on the DNA, and actually gives some practical methods for, visualization, meditation, and toning. There's a keyword to tone there. And if they go to,
it's Agla or
Agla, yeah,
Agla.
Agla. And there's a lot of deep, mystery school teachings around that, but too much to go into here. But what I would say is that if they go to Gaia.com/Theresa Bullard, the first episode in my recommended watch list is for free, and it is that particular episode.
I'll look for that link, and people can find that right in the description, the show notes, wherever you're listening. The final question, hopefully not the final. I would love to do this again, Theresa. This was beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
This is more like a time travel question. So the main mission of this podcast is to bridge this new consciousness with the next generation of leaders, introducing them to distinguished minds and extraordinary minds like you, to start awakening those potentials in the younger generations. And this is a question where we would have to time travel 10, 20 years into the future. And, this generation now stepping more into a leadership role in society and in the systems, creating the new paradigms. And if you were to leave a time capsule, you could include words, you can include objects, you can include tools, technologies, anything that you would want to include for these next generations that would open your time time capsule to be able to step into Shambhala, this new paradigm that humanity is headed towards. What would you include in that time capsule?
I would probably include a copy of the Hermetica and the Kybalion, which are two, wisdom teachings from the Hermetic tradition that I feel really bring some essential wisdom that is needed. I would include a glyph of the Tree of Life, even if they don't have full understanding of it. If they can meditate upon it, it can awaken things for them. If I could leave a recording, I'd probably take my whole mystery teaching series and
just include all in there in a hard drive.
And there it is. Go listen to this.
Yes.
Our world is going to completely change within just the next 5 years, let alone the next 20 years. So by 20 years from now, we're going to look back and see that this time was such a huge time of shifting and transformation. And hopefully in 20 years from now, we will have learned from the mistakes of this time that to not repeat these mistakes. And that the most important thing is that we can, find ways to transcend our differences and really, come into the what unites us rather than what divides us. And that there is a real need for greater tolerance and acceptance of the diversity, rather than trying to make those differences be the thing that separates and divides. Because if we want to really succeed at creating a better world, we have to unite.
Yes. And I've thought about this a lot because I feel like in the next coming years, a lot of people will be activating their psychic abilities and their spiritual senses. And I was just watching a series on Netflix called Manifest. where, you know, it's a whole thing. I'll send you a link, but it's a really good series about people who are activating these psychic abilities. And towards the end of that season, you start seeing how the rest of the world kind of puts them into the them category. So I've always had that thought of like, if we can get over racism, that's one thing, but what about people who start activating these potentials within themselves? Can we still view them as part of us instead of like separating, oh no, they're just more gifted, they have these abilities? We've had a lot of channelers, as you said, mediums on the show. So it's really fascinating, and seeing that with an open mind and an open heart, just you know, seeing someone that is in their true self, their truest potential, their unique vibration. I think there's a mirroring effect that happens that allows that to unlock within us. So I'm grateful for you stepping into your truest mission and your purpose in this life, for being such a pioneer and leader, for speaking from your heart. I really honor your journey, your path, and whatever we can do to support you. We are here.
Thank you also for being somebody who's ready to, you know, try and create that bridge between the generations. And that's something that I, you know, have felt like I'm also doing, but from the elder, you know, the elder generation to sort of this indigo generation. And then, you know, people who like you who are bridging into the next younger generations. Like, we all need those bridges and to work together so that we can pass the wisdom on to the future.
Yes. I would, let's continue the bridge. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me as your guest.
Of course, anytime.